In the gilded towers of global finance and technology, Rosalie Beaumont was a queen. At 38, she commanded Aetherian Corp, a multi-billion-dollar empire she built with her late husband. Her name was synonymous with ruthless innovation and untouchable success. But an invisible enemy laid siege to her body, a disease so rare that doctors whispered it was a death sentence. The world's greatest medical minds, backed by her infinite fortune, all failed. As her empire began to fracture and rivals circled, her last hope came not from a state-of-the-art lab, but from a simple bag of blood donated by a carpenter from the other side of the city. A single father whose simple act of kindness held the one-in-a-billion miracle she so desperately needed. The boardroom on the 80th floor of the Aetherian Tower was Rosalie Beaumont's sanctuary and her battlefield. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of New York City, a kingdom she had conquered. Inside, the air was a carefully controlled 70 degrees, smelling faintly of polished mahogany and ambition. Rosalie sat at the head of the obsidian table, her posture impeccable, her gaze sharp enough to dissect balance sheets and boardroom traders with equal precision. The Q3 projections for the Helios initiative are unacceptable, Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of finality. Your division has a week to present a viable alternative, or I will reallocate its funding. The man flinched as if struck. No one argued. They knew better. Rosalie Beaumont didn't get to the top by accepting mediocrity. She had taken the reins of Aetherian Corp 5 years ago, after her husband Robert had been killed in a sudden, senseless car accident. Grief had not broken her. It had forged her into something harder, more focused. The company was all she had left of him, and she protected it with the ferocity of a lioness. But lately the lioness was tiring. It started subtly. A wave of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. A persistent chill that lingered even in the heated rooms of her penthouse. Then came the bruises, faint purple clouds that blossomed on her skin with no apparent cause. She ignored it, attributing it to stress and burnout. But one morning during a tense negotiation with a Japanese tech firm, her nose began to bleed. It wasn't a trickle. It was a torrent that stained her pristine white silk blouse crimson. That incident led her to Dr. Eris Albright at St. Jude's Medical Center, one of the world's foremost hematologists. After a battery of tests that felt more like an interrogation of her very cells, the diagnosis was delivered in hushed clinical tones. Aplastic anemia, but of an incredibly aggressive and atypical variant. Her bone marrow was shutting down. It was failing to produce new blood cells. It's an autoimmune response, Rosalie, Dr. Albright explained, his face grim. Your own immune system is attacking your marrow's stem cells. We've never seen a case progress this rapidly. Her vast fortune was mobilized. She was given immunosuppressants, blood transfusions, platelet infusions, and experimental growth factors. She flew in specialists from Germany and South Korea. They all left shaking their heads, defeated by the rebellion in her blood. A bone marrow transplant was the only viable long-term solution, but a match couldn't be found. Not in her family and not in any global registry. Her genetic markers were an anomaly, a cruel quirk of fate. The world began to shrink. The boardroom was replaced by a sterile private suite at St. Jude's. The panoramic view was now just a window overlooking a small hospital garden. Her sharp suits were replaced with soft cotton gowns. The only familiar scent was the sharp tang of antiseptic. Her illness was a secret, masked by press releases about a sabbatical. But secrets in her world had a short shelf life. On the board of Aetherian, Gideon Price, a man whose ambition was matched only by his predatory instincts, began to move. He smelled weakness. He started sowing dissent, questioning her absence, suggesting the need for interim leadership. Her loyal second-in-command, Beatrice Chen, fought him at every turn, but she was holding back a tide. One evening, as a nurse was changing her IV bag, Rosalie caught her reflection in the darkened window. Her skin was pale and waxy, her cheekbones stark, her once vibrant eyes now shadowed with a deep, consuming weariness. She was 38 years old, a billionaire queen of industry, and she was dying. The iron will that had built an empire was useless against the silent treason of her own body. As another wave of bone-deep cold washed over her, she closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in surrender. All her power, all her money, all her fight, it had all failed. Miles away from the sterile luxury of Rosalie's hospital suite, in a modest, well-loved house in Queens, the air smelled of sawdust, honey lemon tea, and childhood. This was the world of Tyler O'Connell. At 36, his wealth wasn't measured in stock options, but in the soundness of his daughter's laughter. A furniture restorer by trade, his hands were calloused and strong, capable of breathing life back into forgotten pieces of wood. His most precious creation, however, was his 7-year-old daughter, Lily. She was a whirlwind of bright red hair, freckles, and insatiable curiosity. She had her mother's eyes, a vibrant green that Tyler saw every time he looked in the mirror, a painful, beautiful reminder of the woman he'd lost to cancer 3 years ago. Their life was a tapestry of simple, cherished rituals: early morning pancake-making sessions, walks in the park where Lily would narrate elaborate stories about the squirrels, and evenings spent in his workshop, where she would help by organizing his screws into little jars while he meticulously worked on an antique writing desk. But their routine also included a monthly visit to the pediatric hematology clinic at St. Jude's. Lily had been diagnosed with a mild form of thalassemia, a hereditary blood disorder that required monitoring but was, thankfully, not life-threatening. For her, it was a grand adventure. She knew all the nurses by name, had her favorite chair in the waiting room, and considered the complimentary juice box the highlight of the trip. For Tyler, it was a reminder of life's fragility. He would sit by her side, distracting her with stories or silly faces as the phlebotomist drew her blood, his heart clenching with a familiar mix of fear and gratitude. It was manageable. They were lucky. On a crisp Tuesday in October, while Lily was having her checkup, Tyler saw a sign for a blood drive in the hospital lobby. "Your donation can save up to 3 lives," it read. He had always been a regular donor, seeing it as a small, easy way to pay his good fortune forward. His blood type was O negative, the universal donor, which nurses always told him made him a special commodity. He checked his watch. Lily's appointment would be another hour. "I'll be right back, sweet pea," he told her, kissing the top of her fiery red hair. "Just going to give some blood. I'll bring you back an extra cookie." The process was mundane. He filled out the questionnaire, answered the standard questions, and then lay back as a nurse expertly found a vein in his arm. He squeezed the stress ball, watched the dark red liquid fill the bag, and thought about the grocery list for the week. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, the feeling of doing a small, anonymous good deed. He had no idea who would receive this blood. It could be a car accident victim, a patient in surgery, or someone fighting a chronic illness. He didn't need to know. It was enough to give. Afterward, he took his cookie and juice box, grabbed an extra cookie for Lily as promised, and went back to her room. She was busy drawing a picture of a unicorn fighting a dragon. "Did you save some lives, Daddy?" she asked, not looking up from her masterpiece. "I hope so, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "I sure hope so." He sat down, his arm a little sore, and watched his daughter draw. He was just a single dad, a carpenter from Queens. In a city of 8 million stories, his was a simple one, built on love, loss, and the quiet determination to give his child a happy life. He had no idea that the bag of blood he had just donated, now labeled, cataloged, and stored in a refrigerated unit, was about to become the most important story of all. It was a lifeline, a 1 in a billion lottery ticket, heading for the 12th floor, to a woman whose world was a universe away from his own. The atmosphere in Rosalie Beaumont's private wing was heavy with a sense of impending defeat. Her latest blood work was catastrophic. Her platelet count had plummeted to a level where a minor bump could cause a fatal internal hemorrhage. Her red blood cell count was so low she was in a constant state of oxygen-starved exhaustion, a thick fog clouding her brilliant mind. Dr. Eris Albright stood before her bed, his face etched with the strain of a man who was used to winning but was now facing an unassailable foe. "Rosalie, we're out of conventional options," he said, his voice low. "The transfusions are barely keeping you stable. It's like pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it. Your body destroys the new cells almost as fast as we can put them in." Rosalie's gaze was fixed on the IV stand, a metallic tree bearing strange fruit, bags of blood, platelets, saline. "So this is it," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "The end of the line." "No," Albright said, a sudden fierceness in his tone. "I'm not giving up." He had a wild idea, a desperate last-ditch effort born from a sleepless night spent poring over immunology journals. "Your immune system is hyper-specific in its attack. It's not just targeting standard blood markers. It's targeting a rare protein complex on the surface of your own stem cells. What if we could find a donor whose blood lacks that specific complex entirely? It's a genetic long shot, a 1 in a billion chance." He explained his plan. His lab had developed an experimental new screening protocol, a highly sensitive assay that could test for this exact anomaly. With Rosalie's permission and a massive grant from her personal funds, they would run the assay on every single bag of O-negative blood in the hospital's entire donor bank. It was a monumental task, a search for a single needle in a continent of haystacks. Rosalie, too weak to argue, simply nodded. Hope was a currency she had run out of, but she could see the desperate need for it in her doctor's eyes. For 36 hours, the lab ran nonstop. Technicians worked in shifts, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors displaying endless streams of genetic data. Hundreds of samples were tested. All failed. Each result was another nail in the coffin. Then at 3:17 a.m. on the second day, a young, bleary-eyed lab tech named Ben stared at his screen. An alarm, soft and electronic, pinged. He blinked, thinking it was a system error. He ran the test again. The same result. A sample coded simply as R734B came back negative for the hostile protein complex. It was a perfect blank slate. A ghost. The hospital machinery moved with lightning speed. The bag was located, cross-matched, and rushed to Rosalie's floor. It was a standard-issue blood bag, indistinguishable from the dozens she had already received. The label bore no name, only a barcode and the blood type. O-negative. It was Tyler O'Connell's blood. As the nurse connected the bag to Rosalie's IV line, no one expected a miracle. They just hoped it would buy her another day. The dark, life-giving fluid began its slow drip into her veins. Rosalie had drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep. But as the new blood mingled with her own, something began to shift. It was not a sudden, dramatic awakening. It was a slow, subtle return. The suffocating fog in her mind began to thin. The crushing weight on her chest seemed to lighten by a fraction. A faint warmth, the first she had felt in weeks, began to spread from her core to her fingertips. By morning, the change was undeniable. When Dr. Albright did his rounds, he found her sitting up in bed, reading a financial report on a tablet. The waxy gray pallor of her skin had been replaced by a hint of color. Her eyes, though still tired, had a spark of their old clarity. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Clearer," Rosalie said, her voice stronger than it had been in a month. The cold is gone." He immediately ordered a new round of blood work. The results came back an hour later, and he stared at them, his heart pounding. Her platelet counts were up. Her red blood cell counts had not only stabilized, but had slightly increased, beyond what the transfusion alone could account for. It was as if this new blood wasn't just supplementing her system, it was calming it. It had somehow signaled a ceasefire in her body's civil war. "My God," Albright breathed, looking from the lab report to the woman in the bed. It worked. For the first time in a very long time, Rosalie Beaumont felt a flicker of something she had thought was lost forever. It wasn't just clarity, it was hope. But with it came a burning question. The science was a miracle. But who was the source? Who was the anonymous stranger whose blood had done what $1 billion and the world's best doctors could not? "I want to meet the donor." Rosalie's voice, though still lacking its full boardroom authority, held a new and unshakable resolve. She was sitting in a plush armchair in her hospital suite a week later, looking out at the city. She had received 2 more transfusions from the same miraculous source, and with each one, she felt life seeping back into her. Her mind was sharp again, the businesswoman reawakening. A debt had been incurred, and Rosalie Beaumont always settled her accounts. Dr. Albright hesitated. Rosalie, donor information is strictly confidential. There are privacy laws. Eris, she cut him off, her gaze turning from the window to him. Your 1 in a billion miracle is flowing through my veins. This isn't about a simple thank you card. This person is my lifeline. The hospital's legal department works for the board, and I can assure you the board will see things my way. Find him, or her. The search was delicate, navigating a minefield of ethics and regulations. But the CEO of Ethereum Corp was not a woman to be denied. Within 2 days, Dr. Albright had a name, Tyler O'Connell. Address, Queens. Occupation, furniture restorer. A widower. A single father. Rosalie absorbed the information, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. She had imagined someone like herself, a disciplined health enthusiast, a biohacker, perhaps another wealthy individual with a rare genetic profile. She had not pictured a carpenter from Queens. The meeting was arranged with the care of a diplomatic summit. Tyler received a call from a hospital administrator speaking in vague but urgent terms about the unique properties of his recent donation and a grateful recipient who wished to express their thanks in person. Confused and a little concerned, but assured it was good news, Tyler agreed. He arranged for his sister Sophie to watch Lily and made his way to the private, exclusive wing of St. Jude's he never knew existed. He felt immediately out of place. The air was quieter here, the floors carpeted, the walls adorned with tasteful art. He clutched his worn leather jacket, suddenly conscious of the faint scent of wood stain that clung to him. A stern-faced woman in a sharp suit, Beatrice Chen, met him at the nurse's station and escorted him to a private suite. The room was larger than his living room, with a stunning view and fresh flowers on every surface. And in the center, not in the bed but seated in a chair like a queen holding court, was Rosalie Beaumont. He recognized her instantly from magazine covers. She looked paler and more fragile than in her photos, but the same intimidating aura of power surrounded her. "Mr. O'Connell," she said, her voice a polished, low-pitched instrument. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Tyler sat awkwardly on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his truck. The hospital said, "Something about my blood." "Your blood, Mr. O'Connell," Rosalie said, her eyes studying him intently, "has saved my life. I have a rare condition. All treatments failed. Your blood is the only thing that has worked. The doctors tell me you are, for me, the only compatible donor on the planet." Tyler stared at her, speechless. He thought back to that mundane Tuesday, squeezing the stress ball, thinking about groceries. The idea that his simple act had resulted in saving this powerful woman in this magnificent room, was too vast to comprehend. I'm glad I could help," he stammered. "That's why people donate, right?" Rosalie had prepared for this moment. She had a checkbook in the drawer of the bedside table. She had her legal team on standby to draft a contract for future donations, a contract that would set him up for life. She expected him to ask for something. Everyone always wanted something. "I'd like to compensate you, of course," she began, moving into familiar territory, "for your time, your inconvenience. We can set up a private arrangement." Tyler held up a hand, a gesture that was so natural and unassuming it stopped her mid-sentence. "No," he said, shaking his head. "No thank you, ma'am. That's not necessary. It was a blood donation. You don't pay for something like that." Rosalie was stunned into silence. He had refused, simply, politely, and absolutely. She had built her empire on the principle of leverage, on understanding what people wanted and using it. But this man, this carpenter with kind eyes and sawdust on his boots, wanted nothing. It was a variable she hadn't calculated. "But I will need more," she found herself saying, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her voice. "My condition, I'll need regular transfusions to live." Tyler met her gaze, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a billionaire CEO. He was looking at a person who was scared. "Then I'll be here," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Just have the hospital call me when you need it. It's no trouble." The conversation that followed was stilted at first. She asked about his work, and his face lit up as he described the grain of a century-old cherrywood bureau. He asked about her, and she gave clipped, impersonal answers about Ethereum Corp. The real breakthrough came when he mentioned why he was at the hospital in the first place. "My daughter Lily," he said, a photo already out of his wallet. "She has a mild blood condition. We come for checkups." Rosalie took the photo. A little girl with a gap-toothed grin and a riot of red hair beamed up at her. Something inside Rosalie, a place that had been frozen solid since Robert's death, thawed a little. When he left, Rosalie sat in silence for a long time. Tyler O'Connell had walked into her carefully controlled world and shattered all her expectations. He wasn't a resource to be managed or a variable to be controlled. He was just a good man. And in that moment, she was more intrigued by the carpenter from Queens than by any multi-billion-dollar deal she had ever closed. The arrangement became a strange, new rhythm in their lives. Every 10 days, Tyler would come to St. Jude's private wing. He would donate his blood, and then, while he had his juice and cookies, he would sit with Rosalie. Their conversation slowly deepened, moving from polite small talk to something more genuine. He brought her a small, intricately carved wooden bird he had made. She found herself telling him about Robert, not the business partner, but the man who made terrible jokes and loved sailing. He spoke of his late wife, of the difficulty and profound joy of raising Lily on his own. In that sterile, quiet room, their two vastly different worlds began to overlap. As Rosalie grew stronger, she was discharged from the hospital, though she still required the regular transfusions. She insisted the donations now happen at her penthouse, arranged by a private nurse. Tyler was hesitant, but she was persuasive. Walking into her home for the first time was like stepping into another reality. It was a palace in the sky, all glass and steel and minimalist art, with a view that seemed to encompass the entire world. It was beautiful, but to Tyler it also felt cold and achingly empty. He brought Lily with him once, at Rosalie's insistence. The 7-year-old girl was a splash of vibrant, chaotic color in the monochrome world of the penthouse. She ran her hands over the marble statues, asked if the chef could make dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets, and ended up teaching Rosalie how to play Go Fish on a priceless antique table. Watching Tyler with his daughter, Rosalie saw a richness that all her money couldn't buy. She saw a warmth and an uncomplicated love that she craved with an intensity that frightened her. A fragile, tentative romance began to bloom. It was a relationship built on the most intimate of foundations. His life force was literally sustaining hers. She took him to a charity gala, a world of tuxedos and fake smiles. He felt like a zoo animal on display, but he held her hand, a solid, grounding presence in her artificial world. She went with him and Lily to a local street fair in Queens. She ate a corn dog, got her face painted, and laughed more than she had in 5 years. But their idyllic, blossoming connection was not going unnoticed. At Aetherian Corp, Gideon Price was watching Rosalie's miraculous recovery with suspicion and frustration. Her return to the company, looking healthier and more vibrant than she had in months, had derailed his carefully laid plans for a takeover. He hired a private investigator to find the reason for her recovery. The investigator was good. It didn't take him long to uncover the regular visits of a carpenter from Queens to the CEO's penthouse. To Gideon, it was a godsend. An affair? A secret lover? This was leverage. This was a weapon. He began his attack subtly. He leaked anonymous tips to gossip columnists and financial blogs. Whispers started circulating. Who was the mystery man visiting the reclusive CEO? What hold did he have over her? The whispers grew louder. Photos were taken. Tyler leaving her building, Rosalie and Lily in the park. The narrative Gideon's camp spun was a toxic one. A grieving, vulnerable billionaire being taken advantage of by a handsome, working-class opportunist. Was he extorting her for his miracle blood? Was her judgment compromised? The board of directors grew nervous. The stock price of Aetherian wobbled. They were men and women who thought in terms of risk and optics, and a CEO involved in a potential public scandal with a blue-collar single father was a massive liability. The pressure mounted on Rosalie. During a tense, closed-door meeting, a senior board member, a man who had known her for years, put it to her bluntly. "Rosalie, for the good of the company, you need to end this association. Whatever this man is to you, he is now a threat to Aetherian stability. Cut him loose." That evening, Tyler arrived for his scheduled donation. He found Rosalie standing by her vast windows, a newspaper discarded on the table. The headline was a lurid one: Beaumont's blood brother, savior or Svengali. A paparazzi photo showed him looking up at her penthouse, the angle making him look like a hopeful sycophant. "Maybe I shouldn't come here anymore," Tyler said quietly, his heart aching. "They're twisting it, making it ugly. I don't want to hurt you or your company." Rosalie turned to him, her face a mask of conflict. The CEO in her knew the board was right. The logical, ruthless part of her brain screamed that he was a liability she couldn't afford. But the woman in her, the woman who was finally learning to feel again, knew that pushing him away would be a wound far deeper than any disease. "What they're saying, that you're using me," she started, her voice faltering. Tyler looked at her, his expression not of anger, but of deep sadness. "Do you believe that, Rosalie?" She met his honest, unwavering gaze. "No," she whispered, "I don't." But the serpent was in their garden, its poison spreading. Gideon Price had successfully framed Tyler as her greatest weakness. Rosalie was now faced with an impossible choice: the empire she had sworn to protect, or the man who had not only saved her life, but was slowly capturing her heart. The attack, when it came, was not a frontal assault, but a poisoned dagger in the dark. Gideon Price, a master of corporate warfare, funneled his curated dossier of half-truths and vicious insinuations to a financial journalist known for his savagery. The resulting article, published on the front page of the Wall Street Chronicle's digital edition, was a masterpiece of character assassination. Rosalie read it in the cold, blue light of dawn in her penthouse. The headline itself felt like a physical blow: Beaumont's blood brother, savior or Svengali. The article spun a lurid tale of a brilliant but emotionally fragile widow, her judgment compromised by a handsome working-class carpenter who held the literal key to her life. It was filled with weasel words and leading questions. Sources close to the board expressed deep concern over Mr. O'Connell's unprecedented access and influence. Is Ethereum's visionary CEO being manipulated by a man who stands to gain millions? The paparazzi photo they used was particularly cruel. A shot of Tyler looking up at her building, his expression of simple concern twisted by the caption to look like one of hungry aspiration. A cold, controlled fury settled in Rosalie's chest. It wasn't the attack on her that enraged her the most. She was used to that. It was the defilement of something pure. They had taken Tyler's quiet decency, his selfless kindness, and painted it as a greedy, calculated scheme. The fallout was immediate and relentless. Her phone began to vibrate incessantly with alerts, emails, and frantic texts. Ethereum's stock, an entity she viewed as an extension of her own health, plunged 7% in the first hour of trading. The board predictably panicked. A formal, coldly worded email informed her of an emergency meeting scheduled for the next morning to discuss the ongoing crisis of leadership. Beatrice Chen's voice was fraught with desperation when she called. "They're circling, Jen. Gideon has them completely spooked. Howard Vance is talking about invoking the fitness to lead clause in the corporate bylaws. They're going to demand you cut all ties with Tyler, publicly. If you refuse, they'll move to oust you." Miles away in Queens, Tyler saw the article on the screen of a tablet at his local coffee shop. His face burned with a humiliation so intense it made him feel sick. His simple life, his privacy, had been violated and twisted into something ugly. Tourists and finance guys at the next table were talking about it, laughing about the billionaire and the carpenter. He fled the shop, his heart pounding with a helpless rage. His first instinct was to protect Rosalie. He called her, his voice tight. "Jen, I saw it. I am so sorry. This is my fault. I'll disappear. I'll issue a statement. Tell them I'm the one ending it. Whatever it takes to get them off your back." Hearing his voice, so full of anguish and a desire to shield her from the mess, nearly broke the dam of her composure. "No, Tyler," she said, her voice strained. "This is not your fault. This is a game, and they're using you as a pawn." "Then let them take the pawn off the board," he insisted. "I don't matter here. Your company does." "You matter to me," she whispered, a confession that hung in the air with terrifying weight. After she hung up, the silence of the penthouse pressed in on her. She walked to the window, looking down at the city she had once commanded so effortlessly. Now it felt like it was closing in to crush her. The choice before her was stark and impossible. The old Rosalie, the ruthless CEO forged in the crucible of her husband's death, knew the logical move. She would sever the connection. She would issue a cold corporate statement, paint Tyler as a regrettable lapse in judgment, and cauterize the wound to save the empire. It would be clean, brutal, and effective. But as she stood there, her gaze fell upon the small, intricately carved wooden bird Tyler had made for her, sitting on a side table. She picked it up, its smooth, polished surface cool against her skin. It was a simple, honest thing, made with patient, loving hands. It represented his world, a world of tangible beauty, of quiet integrity. Her world was one of abstraction, of stock prices and leveraged buyouts, and now of poisonous lies. To save her world, she had to destroy his. She had to become the person the tabloids accused her of being, cold, calculating, and willing to use anyone to get what she wanted. Pushing Tyler away wouldn't just be a strategic maneuver. It would be a betrayal of the woman he was helping her become. It would be a kind of death, a surrender of her newly awakened soul. Meanwhile, in the hushed, sterile labs of St. Jude's, Dr. Eris Albright was waging a different kind of war. He was oblivious to the corporate drama, utterly consumed by the scientific mystery that was Tyler O'Connell's blood. The why of the cure gnawed at him. It wasn't enough to know that it worked. He had to understand the mechanism. Late one night, surrounded by the quiet hum of genomic sequencers, he stared at a complex data visualization on his monitor, his eyes bleary from lack of sleep. He had been chasing a ghost, a theoretical anomaly in Tyler's genetic code that his colleagues had dismissed as a statistical improbability. He was about to give up when his screen flashed with a soft, electronic ping. An alert. Not an error, but a flag. His heart began to pound. He zoomed in on the data string, his fingers flying across the keyboard. There, on chromosome 6, was a sequence he had only ever read about in obscure immunology journals. It wasn't the absence of a protein that made Tyler's blood compatible, as he had first theorized. It was the presence of something entirely new, a powerful active agent. He cross-referenced the sequence with a protein expression database. The result that came back made him leap to his feet. The genetic marker, which he mentally dubbed the H47 gamma marker, coded for the production of a unique, previously undocumented type of regulatory T-cell. These cells were, for lack of a better term, super healers. They were extraordinarily potent peacekeepers, programmed to identify and deactivate specific rogue autoimmune responses without compromising the rest of the immune system. Tyler O'Connell wasn't a universal donor. He was a universal cure for this specific, fatal pathology. "My God," Albright breathed into the empty lab, the sound echoing off the tile. "It's a key, a perfect genetic key." He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking with an excitement that transcended mere science. This was a revelation. "This is Nobel Prize level stuff," he whispered to himself before dialing. The phone rang in Rosalie's silent penthouse. She answered, her voice flat and tired. "Eris, if it's about the media, Forget the media!" Albright's voice crackled with an energy she had never heard from him before. "Rosalie, I found it. I know why it works. It's not just blood. It's a key, a genetic key that unlocks the cure to your disease. We can prove it. It's undeniable, quantifiable, and it's the most beautiful piece of immunology I've ever seen." As Rosalie listened to his rapid-fire, joyous explanation of T-cells and genetic markers, something inside her shifted. A profound, electrifying clarity washed over her, incinerating the fog of her despair. The scandal, the board, Gideon's schemes, they were all built on a foundation of lies. And the most powerful way to fight a lie is not with a denial, but with an irrefutable truth. They thought Tyler was her weakness, a romantic liability. They were fools. He wasn't her weakness. He was a scientific miracle. And a miracle was not something you hid. It was something you revealed. A plan, audacious and brilliant, began to form in her mind. The warrior CEO she had been, and the vulnerable woman she was becoming, merged into a single, formidable force. She hung up with Albright and immediately dialed Beatrice. "Cancel any press statement we've drafted," she commanded, her voice now sharp and full of purpose. "And I need everything you have on Gideon Price's side dealings. I don't care how deep you have to dig. I need ammunition. I'm no longer on the defensive." Her final call was to Tyler. Her voice was calm, steady, and imbued with a conviction that he could feel through the phone. "I have a board meeting tomorrow morning," she said. "They're going to try and fire me. I need you to be there." There was a moment of silence. "Are you sure, Jen?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. "They hate me. I'll just make everything worse." "I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in a long time," she replied. "They think you're a threat because they see our connection as a secret to be ashamed of. Tomorrow we're not going to hide. We're going to show them the truth. Not just our truth, Tyler. The truth." He didn't understand the science or the corporate strategy, but he understood the steel in her voice. He trusted her. "Okay," he said simply, his own resolve solidifying. "I'll be there." The game was not over. Gideon Price thought he had his opponent in checkmate. He had no idea Rosalie Beaumont was about to flip the entire board. The Ethereum boardroom on the 80th floor felt less like a meeting space and more like a tribunal. Sunlight streamed through the vast windows, but it was a cold, clinical light that seemed to bleach the color from the room, reflecting harshly off the polished obsidian table. The air was thick with tension and the low murmur of grim-faced board members, their bespoke suits like armor for the execution they were about to perform. Gideon Price sat near the center, the picture of calm control. He adjusted his tie, a small, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He had meticulously laid his trap, and his prey was about to walk into it. This wasn't just business. It was the culmination of a years-long rivalry, and he savored the impending victory. The heavy glass doors swished open, and a sudden silence fell. Rosalie Beaumont entered. She did not look like a woman defeated. Her steps were measured and confident, her spine straight, her gaze sweeping over the hostile faces with an unnerving calm. But it was the person who followed in her wake that caused a collective, sharp intake of breath. Tyler O'Connell, looking deeply out of place in a simple but well-fitting charcoal suit, walked in behind her. His shoulders were set, his jaw tight with a mixture of terror and resolve. He met the stunned, judgmental gazes of the most powerful people in the city, his carpenter's hands clenched at his sides, a silent anchor in Rosalie's storm. "Rosalie, this is highly inappropriate," grumbled Howard Vance, the board's elder statesman. "This is a closed-door meeting." "What's inappropriate, Howard?" Rosalie's voice cut through the whispers, crisp and clear as shattering ice. "Is that this meeting is being held based on lies and slander. But since you've all made my personal life the business of this company, I thought it only fair to bring the subject of your concerns here myself. This is Tyler O'Connell." Tyler gave a short, stiff nod, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, the undisguised contempt in their eyes. They saw a nobody, an intruder in their gilded world. But then he felt Rosalie's hand brush his arm, a fleeting, almost imperceptible touch that sent a current of strength through him. He was here for her. That was all that mattered. Gideon leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "A touching, if foolish gesture, Rosalie. A last desperate appeal to emotion. But this isn't about introductions. This is about your compromised leadership. Your judgment has been clouded by this entanglement," he said, gesturing dismissively toward Tyler. "You've become a liability, and your emotional recklessness is putting the entire company at risk." "My judgment has never been clearer, Gideon," she replied, her eyes locking onto his, devoid of any fear. "You want to talk about risk? Let's talk about the real risk to Ethereum. Let's talk about the profound risk of a board member who, 2 days before orchestrating a media leak, used an offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands to short our stock, betting against the very company he swore to protect." The air in the room went still. Rosalie nodded to Beatrice Chen, who stood near the door. With quiet efficiency, Beatrice walked down the length of the table, placing a slim, unmarked folder in front of each board member. The rustle of paper was the only sound. As they opened the folders, a wave of shock rippled through the room. Inside was a meticulously documented, undeniable trail of evidence. Wire transfers, trading logs, encrypted emails Beatrice's forensic team had miraculously unearthed. It was a damning portrait of corporate treason. Gideon's face, once a mask of smug superiority, went ashen. A sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. "This is absurd. A fabrication. She's trying to deflect," he sputtered, his voice rising in panic. "Is it?" Rosalie countered, her voice dropping to a dangerous low as she began to circle the table like a predator stalking its cornered prey. "You saw my illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. You saw my recovery not as a miracle, but as a threat to your ambition. And when you discovered Mr. O'Connell, a good and decent man, you didn't see a human being. You saw a tool, a pawn in your disgusting game to create a scandal and seize control." She stopped directly behind her chair at the head of the table, placing her hands on its back. "You are all wondering about my relationship with this man. You've read the tabloids. You've listened to the whispers Gideon so helpfully provided. You think it's a weakness? In a way, you're right. I have become deeply, profoundly personal with him. More personal than any of you could possibly imagine." She let the words hang in the air, her gaze meeting the eyes of each board member, one by one. She saw confusion, suspicion, and in a few, a glimmer of curiosity. "For the last 3 months, Mr. O'Connell's blood has been transfused into my body every 10 days, she stated, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. "Not because he is an opportunist demanding a price, but because he is a selfless donor who has asked for nothing in return, and not because he is simply a compatible match." She paused, then gestured to the doorway, which opened as if on cue. Dr. Eris Albright, looking both scholarly and deeply uncomfortable in this corporate coliseum, walked in holding a medical file. "This is Dr. Eris Albright, the chief of hematology at St. Jude's Medical Center," Rosalie announced. "He will now explain the entanglement that has so concerned all of you." Dr. Albright cleared his throat, placed his file on the table, and began to speak. For the next 10 minutes, the boardroom of Etherian Corps transformed into a lecture hall for the most exclusive and astonishing medical seminar in the world. He spoke of aplastic anemia, of Rosalie's unique and fatal autoimmune response. He then explained the 1 in a billion genetic anomaly they had discovered in Tyler's DNA. He spoke of the H47 gamma marker, and with a brilliant, simplifying analogy, he described how Tyler's unique regulatory T cells acted not just as compatible cells, but as microscopic peacekeepers, actively hunting down and neutralizing Rosalie's rogue immune cells. He presented charts, genomic data, and cellular response graphs. The board was utterly captivated, their expressions shifting from corporate severity to sheer, unadulterated awe. They were looking at Tyler now not as a social inferior, but as a living, breathing medical marvel. "To be clear," Dr. Albright concluded, his voice resonating with the gravity of his discovery, "Mr. O'Connell's blood is not just a treatment, it is, for Rosalie, a form of living, targeted gene therapy. Scientifically speaking, he is not her weakness. He is, quite literally, her cure." A profound, stunned silence descended upon the room. The narrative Gideon had so carefully crafted had not just been disproven, it had been annihilated by a truth more powerful and incredible than any fiction. Rosalie let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of the revelation to sink in. Then she spoke again, her voice softer now, imbued with a strength that came not from power, but from vulnerability. "Gideon Price tried to destroy this company's leadership for his own personal gain. For that, he will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. As for the rest of you," she said, her gaze sweeping across their faces, "you have a choice. You can continue to lead Etherian based on fear, gossip, and outdated prejudices about whose contribution is valuable and who is worthy of standing in a room like this. Or you can follow a leader who has been forcefully reminded that the greatest innovations, the most profound solutions, often come from the most unexpected of places." She turned her gaze to Tyler, and in front of everyone, her expression softened into one of deep affection and gratitude. "I have spent the last 5 years building this company into an empire of steel and glass, believing that was strength. I was wrong. A company, a life, should be built on something stronger, on integrity, on courage, on human connection. She turned back to the stun board. I am not resigning. We will now vote on the immediate and permanent removal of Gideon Price from this board. The vote was a formality. One by one, hands shot up, firm and decisive. Gideon, utterly defeated, shrank in his chair. He stood up, his face a mask of pale fury, and without another word, he walked out of the room, his career and reputation in ruins. Later that evening, the city lights of New York twinkled below the balcony of Rosalie's penthouse like a fallen constellation. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the distant, muted sounds of the city. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet, peaceful stillness in its wake. Tyler stood beside her, his suit jacket now off, his sleeves rolled up. He leaned against the railing, finally breathing freely. "You were amazing in there," he said, his voice full of a lingering awe. "Like a warrior queen from one of Lily's storybooks." Rosalie smiled, a genuine, unfettered smile that reached her eyes. "I had something worth fighting for," she said, turning to face him. The wind gently tossed a strand of her hair across her face, and she let it be. She reached out and took his calloused hand, its warmth and texture a comforting reality. She interlaced her fingers with his. "You and Lily. You didn't just save my life, Tyler," she said, her voice soft and thick with emotion. "You gave me a life worth living. For years I thought strength meant being unbreakable, building walls so high no one could ever hurt me again. You taught me that real strength is about being brave enough to let someone in." He turned his hand over, enclosing hers in both of his. "I was terrified, Jen," he admitted in a low voice. "I've never felt so small in my life." "You were the biggest person in that room," she replied fiercely, stepping closer. "You stood there, with all of them judging you, and you didn't flinch. You just stood by me. That's a strength their money can't buy." He looked out at the vast, glittering expanse. "So, what does the all-powerful warrior queen CEO of Ethereum Corp do now?" Rosalie followed his gaze, seeing the city not as her kingdom to be conquered, but as a world of possibilities to be shared. "First," she said, a playful light entering her eyes, "she is going to establish the O'Connell-Beaumont Medical Research Foundation, fully funded by Ethereum, to study the potential of the H47 gamma marker." Tyler's eyes widened. "Jen, you don't have to." "I want to," she insisted. "Your gift shouldn't just save me. It might be able to save thousands." She paused, then her expression turned tender. "And after that," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she moved closer still, "she is going to take her daughter and her boyfriend to that street fair in Queens. I have a feeling I can win a much bigger stuffed animal this time." He laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the space between them. "I think Lily would like that." "And what about you, Tyler? What do you want?" He didn't have to think. He looked into her eyes, seeing his future reflected there. "This," he said simply. He gently cupped her face with his free hand and leaned in, finally closing the small distance between them. The kiss was not one of desperate passion, but of profound, peaceful certainty. It was a kiss of gratitude, of relief, of a future promised. It was the merging of two worlds, not in a collision, but in a perfect, quiet alignment. On a balcony high above the world, the carpenter and the queen found their new beginning, built not on contracts and balance sheets, but on a one-in-a-billion love and the simple, miraculous gift of life. And so, the story of Rosalie Beaumont and Tyler O'Connell became a legend, not of corporate takeovers, but of human connection. It serves as a powerful reminder that our greatest treasures are not found in bank vaults or boardrooms, but in the simple, selfless acts of others. Rosalie, the woman who had everything, discovered that all her wealth was meaningless without health and love. Tyler, the man who had little, showed that the richest person is the one who gives without expecting anything in return. Their journey teaches us that hope can be found in the most unexpected places, and that the right person can not only heal our bodies, but mend our souls. If this story of love, sacrifice, and unexpected miracles touched your heart, please take a moment to hit the like button below. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of the good in the world, And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for listening.